What's going on, YouTube? This is Boxingwave, and we are back with another fight breakdown. This weekend, Tszyu is going to be facing off against Bakhram Murtazaliev for the IBF strap at 154. Okay, this fight should be live on PBC, Amazon Prime. Pretty good fight. Tszyu is coming off the loss against Sebastian Fondor, his first defeat, and Bakhram Murtazaliev is still undefeated, 22 wins with 16 knockouts, no draws, no losses. And Tszyu suffering his only defeat to Sebastian Fondor recently, 24 wins, 17 knockouts with that one loss, no draws. Okay, pretty good fight. Not much out there with Bakhram Murtazaliev. First time I found out about him is when he was the Mando for Jamel Charlo's IBF strap. Okay, this was in between the first and second Brian Castano fight. Okay, after that controversial draw, the IBF ordered the fight, and I guess they paid step aside or whatever because Brian, I know Bakhram was like the mandatory for a minute, but they didn't. Obviously Jamel and Castano went on to fight for undisputed for straps instead of defending that IBF strap with Bakhram. All right. Recently, Jamel Charlo's been stripped from all of his titles. I believe all of them now at this point, or champion at recess. And now Bakhram is the champion, and he's going to be defending the title in this fight. But like I said, it's not much to know about him. He's a fighter from Russia. I started doing film study on him back during the whole Jamel Charlo situation. So I've been keeping an eye out on him, but guy with a lot of knockouts, a big guy at the weight, hasn't really fought the better fighters at 154. Okay, there's not many good names there, noticeable names. The only noticeable name there is Jack Coquet, who he recently fought and stopped in the 11th round. And I rewatched that fight this morning, and I watched the whole thing. And, Jack Coquet's been around at 154 for a long time. The one thing is he never was really a puncher. He's kind of a short, stocky guy, but a good boxer, moves very well, good angles. Kind of reminds me of Sergey Deverenchenko, who he also lost to. So his style is kind of similar. I know he gave Andre some trouble years back, but every time he stepped up, he pretty much lost for the majority of his big fights. But he stopped him in the 11th, and Coquet is very older in his later 30s by the time they fought. But it was a good fight, and Bakhram was definitely tested in that fight. There was times where I thought Coquet might pull off the win because he was winning the majority of the later round. He was a smaller guy pushing Bakhram back, hurting him, and outworking him. Okay, seemed like Bakhram got tired midway through the fight. All right, so he's coming off of that win. He was able to stop him in the 11th round. But that's his most notable win. I think Roberto Valenzuela was the other guy that I try to look up film study and do film study on because I know he has more knockouts and more of an aggressive style. But I seen him get knocked out by Xander Zayas very early. I seen him in a couple fights where he got stopped. And, I was kind of curious to see how did that fight go with Bakhram. I know Bakhram won every round according to the judges, but I didn't actually see the fight. But I was kind of curious on why he wasn't able to stop him in that fight. But from what I've seen and what I've seen in the Jack Coquet fight is that his punching power is good, but it's not as nearly as devastating as Tszyu. I think Tszyu has proven to be a much bigger puncher at 154. And it doesn't mean that this guy is not a puncher. It doesn't mean anything like that because, when the guy is a little bit unknown, he can definitely step up in this fight here. I'm sure we're gonna get the best Bakhram in this fight here. But it's just like Sergey Bohachuk in that fight where he fought against Virgil Ortiz. We knew he had power, but we also knew that he's been stopped before. But in my opinion, he won the Virgil Ortiz fight. So sometimes, depending on the styles, depending on the preparation, and just the strategy overall, Bakhram might be better in this fight than he was in a Coquet fight. But there's not much. I mean, from what I've seen, pretty balanced fighter, good punching power, moves decent, has a decent jab, decent fundamentals, not a good defensive fighter, but not a bad one neither. I think he can mix it up on the inside a little bit, and he can fight a rangy fight. He can work and keep his opponent on the end of his jab and use range. And again, he has good quick in and outs and stuff, but nothing amazing, nothing that I've seen that Tszyu hasn't really dealt with already. Tszyu been in there with Tony Harrison. He's been in there with Terrell Gaucher. He's been in there with Brian Mendoza, and he recently been in there with Sebastian Fundora, which I'm going to speak on briefly in a moment. But Tszyu overall, his at this point in his career, even with the one loss that he has, which is a loss with an asterisk, a fight that we need to see a rematch for. Tim Tszyu's just way more proven than Bakhram in every level, and even in the punching power, he's knocked out and he's hurt better fighters, top tier fighters, champions, former champions, top contenders, those kind of guys. Tim Tszyu is on that level. Bakhram winning against Jack Koke doesn't really tell the full story about him. All right, but so there's a lot of unknowns about him in this fight. I can see where he can work on some of the flaws that Tim Tszyu has, but nothing clear, nothing distinctive, nothing really that stands out about him. And I really wasn't that impressed with the Jack Koke fight because Jack is not a big puncher, but he was able to hurt him throughout the fight, was able to outwork him, push him back, and muscle him around. And we already know that Tim Tszyu is a very highly aggressive fighter with a good punch, good counter puncher, and all of those things. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Tim Tszyu. So let's talk about, I've done breakdowns on Tim before in his style. He is a pressure counter puncher. Okay, not a high volume puncher, but a pressure counter puncher. Really does his best work mid range. Has a good jab, overhand right. Good counter puncher, like I said. Pretty flat footed, but he's good at tracking down his opponents, cutting off the ring. And he's been dropped a couple of times, but it hasn't been recent. It's been a while since he got dropped in this. The last time he got dropped was against Terrell Gaucher, but it's mainly in the earlier rounds, the first round, I believe. So Tim Tszyu, one weakness I would probably point out is that sometimes he takes a little while to get it going, but there's fights where, where he can get it going pretty quick. You know what I mean? Back in the Carlos Ocampo fight last year, one of the 3 fights he had last year, he destroyed Ocampo in one of the best knockouts of the year. I think I ranked it like the 3rd best knockouts. It was devastating. It was like so vicious and so violent. He stopped him very early in that fight. All right, but for the most part, including the fights where he got dropped, it was in the first round. And it's mainly because Tim's style, he's kind of active high guard. And I see the most success that most fighters have against him is punching him straight through the car, straight shots, a jab, a straight right hand is where these fighters normally connect. And at times when he steps in to counter, sometimes he leaves himself open and he walks right into a straight shot. So I think with Bakhram going into this fight, I think he needs to focus more on timing. All right, Bakhram is not a fast puncher. He actually has a speed disadvantage here, a pretty noticeable one. So I think he has to have the timing to catch Tim stepping in and landing that right hand. With that being said, Tim, he's more experienced now. He's moving his upper body a lot more. He's moving his head. He's keeping his head off the line a lot better, especially when he's coming in to engage with you. So he's a lot harder to hit. His defense is much tighter than Bakhram. And it's easier said than done, Tim is also a combination puncher, so when he is in range, he once he connects with a good shot, he's throwing flurries and really hard ones. He's mainly looping shots, overhand rights, left hooks, but he likes to throw combinations when he's in position. All right. He doesn't try to he tries not to waste too many punches. Okay, so expect him to be a little bit more accurate, be a little bit more precise, and he's also a very good body puncher. So he's well-rounded, and I think as far as punch placement and just punch variation, I think overall he's the more complete fighter compared to Bakhram. I think Bakhram comes with the same tools, but just not as quick, not as tight, not as precise. Bakhram does a lot more punches in his flurries and tends to keep himself open a lot more with his chin up in the air. He's very tall, and Tim is just coming off of fighting one of the tallest guys below the heavyweight division. All right. So let's talk a little bit about this Sebastian Fundora fight. It is a loss. Tim is coming off of a loss. Tim Tszyu, since Jamel Charlo, and I know Bud just went up there, and Bud is my, personal favorite fighter to watch. But I would say Jamel Charlo, big Charlo fan for many, many years, was covering him on here for many years. Those are my guys. But since then, I would say that Tim Tszyu is probably the best fighter to me because he seems, based on what he says in his interviews, he's not looking to take easy fights. He's not looking to be strategic on who he's picking to fight. He seems to be consistent, and he always wants a tough fight. He's a warrior, and he's proved that in his last fight. Unfortunately, it worked against him because when he fought Fundora, had a great first 2 rounds, especially the second round where he busted up Fundora pretty bad. And watching that fight live, I felt like it was only a matter of time before Fundora get knocked out. But some freak accident happens where I think Fundora cut him on the top of his head with his elbow, but it was a very deep gash, which caused a lot of bleeding that streamed on the down of his face, over his face. And Tim came out of his corner bleeding, and it never stopped. They were never able to stop the cut because it was that deep. It was more than a cut. It was like a whole opening on the top of his head, and he had a fight with that. And when I didn't watch the entire fight, but I watched a little bit of it, and I noticed there was a drastic change from the second and third round. Now, if they had stopped the fight because of the cut, it would have been ruled a no contest. But after 4 rounds, they go to the scorecards. And Tim and his team did not want to stop the fight. They probably felt like they didn't want to chicken out. He wanted to be, of course, he's a fighter, so he wants to be a warrior and all that. I get that. But strategically, it was bad because it changed the pacing of the fight. Because Fundora was already doing well with the jab and keeping distance. Even though Tim at times stepped in, landed some good combos, landed some big shots, at the time, it was just changed the momentum because Tim is literally rubbing the blood from his eyes the entire time, and he's getting caught with shots that he couldn't see coming. The defense fell off dramatically, and it turned into a full blown out war, and it was a great fight, but it was a bad decision, and it cost them the decision win because Fundora did a little bit more. Some people still think Tim won the fight. Fundora, to me, was just a little bit more consistent. I would have been cool with a draw. It was a very close fight, a lot of swing rounds. Both of these guys were punching each other brutally to the face. But Fundora and his jab was the key in that fight, and part of the reason why Tim Tszyu lost that fight. All right. So what do I think about this fight here? Well, Tim is coming off of a loss, but I don't think the loss is affecting him in a negative way, because he still finished and he still performed well. He's fighting a guy with a different style. He's not a southpaw. And overall, I just think certain fights, because Tim Tszyu was supposed to fight Keith Thurman. Remember, Sebastian Fundora was a replacement. Certain guys are not replacement fighters. And I think Sebastian Fundora, even with the knockout to Brian Mendoza, dangerous to fight him as a replacement. Some fighters, you just need a full camp of preparation. You just can't swap out guys on that level. Again, I appreciate Tim for being a warrior, but you got to be smart too. All right. But he's going into another dangerous fight with another dangerous opponent, a puncher who's very, for the most part, unknown. But from what I've seen and watching my film study, I just think Tim has most of, if not all, the advantages here. Defensively, I think he's better. I think he's faster. I think he's more experienced as a pro. I think he's the harder puncher, and I think he's even more durable just based on when I see in the Koke fight. And I think he has a better tank, a gas tank. He's just going to be better all the way around. And I think the longer the fight goes, the more dominant he's going to be. And I just think he's going to just be too much, for Bakhram. I think, use a jab, keep your distance, shoot those right hands straight down the middle. In the exchanges, try to catch Tszyu when he's throwing combos and catch him. But Bakhram just has too many defensive flaws, lunges in, overextends with the right hand, balance issues, just some of the things that I've said about Tim Tszyu in the past fights, I see it in Bakhram. You know, some of the things I've said about David Benavidez with his feet, I've seen this with Bakhram. I just think there's too many openings for Tim Tszyu, and I think Tim Tszyu is going to destroy him. I mean, he keep it all the way 100. Tim Tszyu is going to destroy Bakhram. I think he has a lot to prove here, and I think he's going to destroy him. You know, I'm leaning towards betting the plus 350 within 6 rounds, but there's a part of me that thinks the fight might end within the 5 and 8 rounds. I don't know how durable that Bakhram is going to be in this fight. It's not like Tim Tszyu stops everyone. I know Brian Mendoza went the distance. It took a lot of punishment from him, but Brian Mendoza is an extremely tough fighter. Even Sergey Bochuk took him the distance. You know, he just hasn't been stopped. He's a tough dude. But here, you know, I just think the way Bakhram looked against Jack Coquet, I think Tim Tszyu is just way more powerful, just physically stronger, quicker, has all the advantages. And I see the fight being stopped somewhere in between, I don't know, maybe the 4th and 6th or 4th and 8th rounds. You know, I don't see it really going past 8. Just the defensive flaws is just too obvious, you know. And I think the best that Bakhram's going to do in this fight is probably within the first couple of rounds, if that. So I got Tim Tszyu winning by devastating knockout. I think there's probably going to be multiple knockouts here. I did place a little bit of money on the over for the 2 rounds or 2 knockdowns. So I did put money on that. But as far as the rounds, where it's going to actually end, I'm stuck in between 5 and 8 and 1 through 6. Somewhere around there. But I expect Tim Tszyu to dominate in this fight. All right. Should be a good fight. It should be a war up until the fight is stopped. All right. So yeah, that's my breakdown. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up, share the video if you like the content, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Have a good day.